Our actual name should have been the Scam Alert Podcast, but we felt Crypto Basic was a little more catchy.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crypto Basic Podcast. I am your host, Adam Levy, and here's my co-host, Karim Baruke. What's up, Karim?
How's it going, Adam?
Hey, yeah, and I'm good, but sadly, Brent Philbin will not be making it. He's got his infamous nose tampon situation.
No. It wasn't a nose tampon situation. He has the sniffles. The sniffles.
He's got the sniffles.
So he was making fun of you the other day for not wanting to come on, and now he had the sniffles. But that's okay. We're going to continue on without him. We have to batter on through without the Pillsbury.
Yes, one of these weeks we'll actually have everyone on the great trio, the three amigos. And as usual, I actually don't think we had anything released this week. It's been kind of a hectic week for everyone, and but we plan to get on that soon enough. We hope that Brent makes a speedy recovery from his sniffles. I feel like you can't say sniffles without saying it like that.
Yeah, and without imagining Brent crying and saying, "I can't go on because of my sniffles." That's my Brent imitating somebody voice, by the way.
I'm Turmeric Man.
Yeah, I'm Turmeric Man. So, without Brent, however, we know that you're going to be the one tackling our rapid fire section. Just to remind the audience, by the way, our rapid fire section is where we kick off the flagship with a series of headlines that we're not going to dive super deep into, but we thought you should hear. So, Adam, this is going to be you. Rapid fire is your baby. We don't have Brent slowing us down, so let's tackle it on.
All right. Well, the first quick little article is Netflix has an upcoming series on crypto, but it's actually going to be on altcoins instead of specifically Bitcoin. Actually, sorry. I'm not keen on if it's a series or a documentary. There isn't that much news out there, but I will. But one thing that did come up was that they're planning on having Vitalik, your boy Charles, the Hongfei from Neo. They might even be having one of the guys from VeChain. I mean, they're probably going to be capturing a lot of different
approaches, right? I would assume
approaches. Yeah, even my boy. I hate to say my boy, Justin's son.
Yeah,
they might be interviewing him, but that'll just be fun though.
No, absolutely. Look, he's a part of the space, right? Like you have to include it. If you want to do a documentary about Wall Street or whatever, you got to include all the aspects of it because it's part of the culture. And I think, we have seen a lot of docuseries recently, right? Like, I feel like that's more of a modern phenomenon. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but you're like, sometimes it is just a documentary, like a long movie. But I feel like I've seen more and more of these docuseries where, like, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a 7-episode thing, doing a 20-minute episodes, and they get to explore a bunch of different concepts without tying it all together into one single like narrative, so they might be able to say, platforms or this and this. So like, interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of different types of blockchains out there. There's some that are platforms, some that are just store of value, and it's hard. Just saying altcoin is a very broad statement. Yeah, Bitcoin was very specifically one thing about the history and where it started. But so then.
Before you go on, Adam, I just wanted to say this is cool. I didn't know this. I'm glad you put this in the rapid fire. I do think that Netflix has a particular tap into popular culture, and I do think that this is interesting because it shows how much deeper we're getting into the mainstreamization of cryptocurrency, right? Like, I remember getting super excited when the mainstream Bitcoin documentary was coming out. Just the fact that people were going to get a chance to see a nicely edited, professionally done history of Bitcoin was exciting. And now we're diving into all of the other cryptocurrencies, which, that's cool. I'm excited.
Yeah. And so to piggyback on, the word crypto, Electronic Arts, EA, tweeted out the other day, September 19th. I think that was, so that was Thursday. They tweeted out, I don't even know what day it is. Yeah, it was Thursday. So they tweeted out, invest in crypto. That's all it said. And it got 23 likes. 8.3K retweets, including me. I had to retweet that. And the thing is that apparently there is a new character in their game called Apex Legends, which is kind of like a battle royale kind of Fortnite-y game.
Okay.
And it actually had a lot of hype very early on. I actually lost a prop bet to a few poker players because I thought that Apex was going to be the Fortnite killer. But ultimately, I thought that there was that's a different. I thought that I got my money in good, but we kind of got we had some. I might have been a little premature on it, but or I should have made the parameters longer and not because there needs to be more time for Apex to build their environment. I'm getting off track though, but it says invest in crypto with a capital C. And that's basically because they have a new character that is being released for season 3 of Apex Legends. And it's kind of amazing because people are like, it's kind of a cryptic tweet. Then obviously they're getting all just annihilated in the mentions with, Justin Sun's in there. Check out games built on #Tron. And then, there's all Binance is hopping in there. And it's just kind of.
How can they not, right? It's a feeding frenzy. Basically, EA comes out as this juicy gazelle of the mainstream and says the word crypto. How are all the crypto hyenas not going to come take a bite? Of course.
Yeah. It's just a good way to create some buzz, especially for season 3 of that game. I do think it is better than Fortnite. You should try it.
All right, that's it. Adam thinks he should have won that bet. I guess his referees are still having the decision under review. We do have to mention, Adam, though. I mean, crypto news is good news. We're pro crypto. I have to let the audience know, for everybody that doesn't know, some fun facts about EA. Did you know that the world record for the most downvoted Reddit comment in history belongs to Electronic Arts?
Yeah, apparently they make good games, but then apparently they don't ever listen to anything the community ever says ever. So, and people feel like they're just kind of.
It's even worse than that. EA realized that microtransactions were a thing, right? So, they are the ones that take it to the extreme level. Whereas now the gaming industry is plagued because that's kind of the old man complaint about the gaming industry, right? The deterioration of it. Games have gotten way better, no question about it. But one of the things that sucks about gaming in this new world is that once developers realize that you can keep charging people for existing in the game, they stopped working as much on okay, we're going to create this complete product, give it to you for $50-$60, which is a big investment. And that's it. You take it home and you have the whole thing. Right now, they realize, oh, wait a minute, this horse that runs faster, or this sword that cuts faster, or this armor that has max defense, if we charge 99 cents for it, then you could just keep getting money out the wazoo. EA took that to the extreme and just started locking in main characters. There was a Star Wars game where you either had to play a bajillion hours to get Darth Vader or pay $5, right? So it started commodifying everything in the game. And when they were attacked for it, they said something along the lines of oh, we think that it's about, the gamers want to the rewarding blah, 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 AKA. And then the gaming community really started hating EA. That doesn't mean they stopped buying their games. So obligatory EA is like the Wells Fargo of gaming comment.
There you go. And I do know for the most upvoted, I think it was that guy that went around for at least it might not be accurate anymore, but I know that for a period of time that there was a guy who went to Magic tournaments and he posed next to dudes with their butt cracks because there were so many of them. And it was such it was kind of I get he got banned from Magic for it. And I kind of get that because you can't really be doing that. But also when you put it on the internet and show that people and their need to improve with their hygiene and showing less butt crack, I kind of respect that.
That thread was legendary. It was, if I remember correctly, it was the all-time top thread until Reddit redid the algorithm so that it didn't start taking away, weighing it down as quickly. And now, well, it was an Obama post, and then now the top-rated all-time post is a funny GIF about Guardians of the Galaxy. So there you go. That shows you the internet.
There you go. So as per usual, the not-so-rapid rapid fire is moving on.
Okay, real quick, I just want the audience to know. Yeah. I'm going to slow it down even more. The reason the rapid fire is taking so long is we are using all the extra Brent time and just packing it in here into the rapid fire. We're allowed to do that. It's an executive decision. We planned it this way. Now you can continue, Adam.
There you go. So the next one is Ethereum. They recently revealed their launch date for testing Istanbul. And apparently Istanbul is the name of their next update, or like their next, it says like in the article, Istanbul is Ethereum's long debated hard fork. So do you know anything about that? Because like, it seems weird to me that Ethereum's hard forking.
Long debated hard. I mean, it might just be talking about an upgrade. To be honest with you, no, I haven't stayed on track of all the Ethereum developments, but I know that like if they ever, for example, want to go to proof of stake, which I believe was Casper, I mean, all of their developments include a hard fork, right? It might not be a split. I don't really know.
Yeah. So the plan is the first update will take place in the next few months, and then the second part of it will be 2020. And the second update will include the progressive proof of work algorithm, which is supposed to remove mining advantages given to miners. And I guess it's been pushed back a lot, and definitely talked about. It got pushed back because of an audit that was done by an independent group that wasn't done yet, and it's supposed to be rolled out. And I feel like I've seen that pop up here and there on Twitter, like some for it, some against it. I'm not really sure about progressive POW.
Don't know enough to comment yet, but I'm sure we'll do some explorations that will give us some better ideas.
But I hope that, I'm just a big fan of Ethereum, and I hope that things don't get delayed and things get rolled out when they say it's going to get rolled out. The next one is JP Morgan's blockchain-based network grows to over 330 banks. And that's pretty cool. It's called the Interbank Information Network. Deutsche Bank is one of the big guys in there, which is, I mean, that's a big bank.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah. Well, and apparently they laid off like a lot of people recently, but still, they're still generating, I mean, it's kind of like if Google goes through like 20% layoffs or something, they still have like a massive workforce, you know? Sometimes you got to clean house, I assume, in a business.
Yeah, well, especially when you're getting closer to economic downturns or...
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows?
And they're using something called Quorum, which is a permissioned version of the Ethereum blockchain. And I guess that's just good for, the space, good for Ethereum. And yeah, I mean, it's just great that JP Morgan has that many banks on board. I feel like it's been a very quick turnaround for a business where, 2 years ago, they were speaking out against crypto?
Yeah. Well, we know that a lot of times that's for show.
Yes. And then the last one is Ethereum. I guess this is the Ethereum rapid fire, but they recently celebrated more than 75 million unique addresses. And that's pretty sick. I'm not sure what the stat of Bitcoin is regarding that, but when you look at, there's a graph that I'm going to post in the show notes, but it basically is in 2017, it was roughly somewhere between 2 and 3 million based on the graph. In like July 2017. And since the first quarter of 2018, it's been a steady rise. It legitimately just looks like a 45-degree angle up. So it's not super fast, but also like that's pretty crazy because that means that 2.5 million, we'll say, in July 2017. That's pretty fast.
It is pretty fast growth. The only thing I will say as a caveat is that, like, let's say unlike traditional banking accounts, which involve all of this process and sometimes even minimal fees or something, the nature of blockchain and how a lot of blockchain gets used makes me not want to draw too much emphasis on just the number of wallet addresses, because you can create so many in a process, right? Like, let's say, for example, me as a single Ethereum holder in my couple of years in the cryptocurrency space, I've had to create multiple Ethereum wallets, whether it's through exchanges or web wallets or a hard fork, or who knows how many are created. That's not even to mention dApps and smart contracts that might automatically create something that's neutral and it's just a pass through, or I don't even know, like it is relevant because clearly it gets created because of somebody participating in the network, but wallet creation in and of itself is not as revelatory of what's really happening in the network. You know what I mean?
That's definitely a good point, but also it's
worth
clearly
noting.
Like not, it is worth noting, but also like, it's not like if let's say there are 2 million addresses in 2017, maybe that was like 500K people or something, unique users. And so it's like, it's still like, whether it's not 75 million people, it's still definitely, a lot more than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Also, I looked up Bitcoin, and apparently they have 460 million unique addresses. So still a ways to go.
Yeah, Bitcoin's the big daddy.
Yeah, big boy.
Big daddy Bitcoin.
Yep. So that's it for the rapid fire. And now you want to hear a little bit about our great sponsor, Wild Foods. You should definitely check them out. They have great different kinds of coffee. I had the cocoa butter, I had the matcha, and the nootropics. I forget. I think it's Cocoa Tropics.
Those all sound amazing. And Brent has held them back from me. So I have not been able to try those. I did, however, get to sample some of their Lion's Mane extract, which was...
I mean, I think you should yell at Brent at some point for that.
I'll yell at Brent.
Some, yeah.
Yelling is not very effective with Brent. He can yell louder.
Yeah.
So, Adam, I have a story about the Federal Reserve. I like to dive deep into these economic things. And I should note, this was actually brought to our attention by somebody in the chart who brought it up first. I want to say Kryptoni86. Give you a little shout out. Was that the first one? Or it might have been the Black Brent. Anyway, so here's the situation. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the overnight borrowing rate shot up, and it caused the Federal Reserve to essentially inject a bunch of money into the money supply. So when I was reading this article, one of the first things that I wanted to understand, because I realized that I don't understand it at a deep level, is, okay, well, what is the overnight borrowing rate? Like, what does that really mean, right? So the explanation that I found on Investopedia is that you have all of these major banks, right? And because of their individual business activity, their cash balance at the end of the day is going to fluctuate a lot, right? You might have a big withdrawal, a big transfer, deposits, all this stuff. So your actual cash on hand is fluctuating, but there are federal limits, Federal Reserve limits, like how much money you have to have on hand, right? So overnight rates basically is the process through which banks lend to other banks. The banks that have cash surpluses can lend to the banks that have cash deficits overnight at a particular rate so that they can meet their minimum cash on hand required, so to speak. The Federal Reserve, or the central bank of the country, the Federal Reserve for us, is a part of that market. And they actually participate in the market sometimes in order to keep the interest rates from going too high or too low, right? And they can actually sometimes target rates. Like, we want to keep the rates at 2%, 2.5%, et cetera.
So why do we want to keep interest rates low? Like, I know this is kind of like a simpleton question, but I kind of just want, is it just because that creates inflation if it gets too high?
Yeah, so the idea is that reducing the interest rate will stimulate economic growth. But because it'll incentivize people to spend money, right? So like, let's say, for example, instead of having to pay a 10% for every dollar that you borrow, you are paying 1%. So you're just getting a huge discount. So if you're, for example, a business person, you could say, wow, I could definitely, like, if I had an extra $500,000, I could definitely make an investment that's going to get me more than 1%. So if I only have to pay 1% for borrowing that $500K, then now I'll borrow it and I'll invest it. And you as a homeowner might say, oh, I'm going to go refinance my mortgage and et cetera, et cetera. So people borrow more and spend more. And the idea is that that'll stimulate the economy. So when in theory, the Federal Reserve will see economic slowdown, that there's a slowdown in activity. They will lower the rates to incentivize people to borrow, to incentivize economic activity. Of course, the risk of that is if you go too much, there's too much borrowing, there's too much leveraging, then it becomes like a systemic risk.
Like the Big Short.
Exactly. Now, again, I don't understand all of the intricacies of the system or anything like that. So this is my best attempt to make sense out of it, right? But the part that is important to notice is that the spike was significant. So here's, just to give you a reference point, the target rate for July. So we talked about how the Federal Reserve basically wants to keep these inflation rates. Because here's another important point. This overnight rate determines the basis through which banks are going to lend to the consumer. Because if, let's say, Bank of America at the end of the day needs to borrow money either from the Federal Reserve or from Merrill Lynch or from whatever, if they have to pay 2% for that money, then they're not going to lend you money at less than 2%. And by extension, if it goes up, then their loans on mortgages or businesses or banks, all of that goes up to account for their cost of borrowing money, right? So that's how it affects the larger system slowly over time. So the Federal Reserve tries to target this rate. And in this case, they wanted July to be between 2% and 2.5%. And on Monday, that rate spiked all the way up to 5%, right?
Wow.
And then it kept surging on Tuesday until its highest point. It was almost at 10% interest rate. So the Federal Reserve was essentially forced to step in, and they started what was called an overnight repo operation, which is essentially them going in and injecting money into the system. Because again, this means that there's a lack of liquidity, right? Because the banks are sitting around saying essentially, okay, I have a shortage of cash, so I need to borrow some cash. And they go to one bank and, hey, let me do the overnight at 2%. And of course, you can't because you're also short, or you're short enough, or enough people are short that you can charge more. So everybody's asking for more and more money. The bottom line is that there's not enough money. That's why they're bidding up the cost of money by paying more and more interest rate. So the Federal Reserve is coming in and saying, okay, this is getting out of hand. We need to inject some money into the system to keep the interest rate closer to the inflation rate. So on Tuesday, to the interest rate, sorry. So on Tuesday, they started the first process, which was it was $53 billion that they put into the system to lower the interest rate. And it did erase a little bit of stress, but they had to come in again on Wednesday, and add another $75 billion because the rates hadn't stabilized, right? Huh. So in total, between Tuesday and Wednesday, the Federal Reserve injected $128 billion into the system. This is not unheard of, but we hadn't really done it since like 2008 or a decade ago. That was basically the last time that they really had to go into the printing machine. So one of the interesting questions that people are asking is, why did this happen? Why did we have this sudden spike in interest rates, which we can also consider a sudden drought of liquidity? So one of the theories is, well, a bunch of U.S. companies recently had to take out a bunch of cash to make payments to the U.S. Treasury for their quarterly tax payments, right? If you pay your taxes quarterly, you have your money in the bank. A bunch of companies just went to the bank and said, hey, I need all this money to pay the government my taxes. So that's one of the things that could have been a catalyst. At least Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, kind of endorsed this theory a little bit. And then some of the more critical theories are saying, like, I don't want to say more critical, but let's say more big picture, is that now we're in a situation where the deficit has increased, right? Because Trump and the Republican Party passed tax cuts recently, as everybody knows. So our tax revenue went down. The federal government's revenue went down because we are taking in less taxes. But they also increased the budgets. They're doing more military spending. There wasn't a budget cut, which means that revenues went down, expenses went up. So the amount of money that the government has to borrow on a regular basis to just keep operating increased. There's more demand for cash. So some of the perspective is that this liquidity shortage also came from the government itself is also basically borrowing more and more and more money. So there's more demand for money, and that increases the rates. So the conclusion, yeah. So the conclusion here is not necessarily like, aha, this is it. The system's about to blow up, but it could certainly be an indicator. I mean, it just shows you how our system needs these kind of random interventions just to function. Because if that had been, let's say, a real free market, there's a good chance those interest rates would have just kept climbing up because there's not a $128 billion buyer that would have came into the system to stabilize the rates were it not for the Federal Reserve.
That's not healthy.
Doesn't seem like it, right?
No. So what you're saying is that if they had not given some of the money from the Federal Reserve, that we would be facing interest rates that were just too high to buy anything, which would cause everyone to stop buying, and then that would maybe...
It would have been a domino, that's for sure. It would have been a domino that would have affected the entire economy as those banks externalized the cost of those increased interest rates. And it's important to note here, because this is really fundamental to the Bitcoin hypothesis, right?
There it is.
What's really important here is it's not even that's money that's being taken out of the Federal Reserve, right? Because the Federal Reserve doesn't have a true balance sheet. Everybody else in the world, when you write a check, it's being taken out of your account. If Adam wants to give me $100, it's from his account to my account. When the Federal Reserve is buying these treasuries, there's no account. When they write a check, that money is created into existence. So on Tuesday and Wednesday, $128 billion that didn't exist before now exist, right? So that's the way the balance sheet works. So why this is important is because if the system comes back up and basically the Federal Reserve has to keep doing these injections, then new money is going to be created constantly. And the way you could see it is, okay, over the next year and a half, we're going to have to print a couple of $100 more billion, if not trillions, while at the same time, the production rate of Bitcoin will be cut in half. So even if we have equal level in value, what will that do to the price of Bitcoin in dollars, right?
Yeah, it'll definitely. I mean, sometimes I get like leveled in these trick questions, but I want to say it's going to double and increase if we're having,
right?
Then the scarcity is going up. So exactly.
And the simplest way to think about it is if there's 10 Bitcoin in existence and $20, and the price of Bitcoin is $2 per Bitcoin. And the only thing that changes is that we're now going to double the amount of dollars in existence. So now there's $40, but still only 10 Bitcoin. Well, it stands to reason that people will be willing to pay $4 for that Bitcoin, right? Now, of course, it's much more complicated. We'll see what the future holds. But this type of activity is at the heart of what the motivation behind Bitcoin was, right?
Yeah. I mean... You can't just inject a bunch of money into Bitcoin to keep, I mean, I guess you can try with whales and all that, but like still, it's not something that it's completely on its own,
That's right. Yeah.
And it is weird that when you say, it's a free market, but it's not really a free market.
Exactly. It's not really a free market, but it is. The Fed is intervening through a free market process.
But we're happy they're intervening, to be honest.
That's actually a great point, Adam, that I wanted to finish this segment with. It is a great point because when people read this, especially sometimes people in the crypto space with our ideology, they kind of look at the Federal Reserve as the bad guy. And sure, historically and in the larger context and with everything in consideration, in some ways. But the people, the individuals in the institution are really literally stuck between a rock and a hard place here because if there is not this intervention, you have systemic failure that affects everybody.
Well, I happen to think that a lot of these situations where people just are like, this person's a bad guy, blah, blah, it's usually something like that where it's like there's really no good answer. That's right. And I mean, that's kind of, I'm not trying to defend Trump, but I'm just like, as far as what a president looks like in my eyes, like, it's just like, hey, here's a shitty situation. Here's another shitty situation. Now you have to pick which one of the shitty situations is less shitty. And I feel like, I mean, you're always upsetting someone when you have to make these hard decisions. And this is why I hear Rogan talk about it a lot. It's absurd that it's only one person that really has to make, like, he has cabinet and advisors, but like There should be more governance within the government.
No, you're right, man, because it's reflective of a very big and complex system. I agree with you that the president, in a lot of ways, becomes this like singular point of ultimate decision making, but they have to balance so many interests. And a lot of times, it's kind of like you just said it, right? Every decision affects somebody negatively. And I think that sometimes people don't realize that in politics and society in general, a lot of the decisions we make are definitely pro one group and anti another group. One group benefits and the other one doesn't. It's not like you could just do something that benefits America. You could do something that benefits different parts of America. And for example, if we pass a carbon tax, there will be a very real positive effect on environment, on revenue, but there will be a very clear negative effect on the revenues for investors in the fossil fuel space, for fossil fuel companies, right? And the society at large has to decide if that's going to be worth the greater overall good, but that's a difficult thing to manage. And you're right, there's usually no right answers. There are difficult compromises.
It's a lot easier to tweet about it and just say that this is what we need to do than actually like delving into every single, like seeing the chain of events that would have to happen in order to get something done.
I agree.
So
yeah, I know we stayed on this a while, so I want to hand a ball back off. EOS troubles are brewing, Adam, and you did the dive on this. Can I just start off by saying that this title does not surprise me? God, I have been just so skeptical of EOS, man.
So I see that maybe I should have changed the headline a little bit. That was the title of the article, but I will say that after reading, or at least like mostly reading the article, it seemed like it was just like stirring the pot a little
overblown.
bit.
Okay, good.
But I wouldn't say it's overblown. But I would say that this is definitely like something like it could be going down. It could be like the tip of the iceberg.
All right.
So a few weeks ago, one of its earliest supporters, EOS Tribe, which is a small company that participated in the launch of the first EOS chain, it called it quits as an EOS block producer. And I guess the head of EOS Tribe, Eugene Luzgin, made a post on Steemit and said, "We at EOS Tribe have never participated in the game of vote trading and stayed true to our principles. And hence, while we leave EOS as block producer, we are also free to speak truth and give warnings to the rest." And I know that we really should be putting this in the shots fired section, but I mean, this was very relevant to this article, and that is quite some shots fired. What do you think of that?
No, that's a big claim, and I want to see what are the warnings. I want to hear. This sounds like definitely trouble's brewing.
So basically, he just kind of went on and said that he called it a brain drain, and I'd never really heard this term before. And basically, when I Googled it, it said basically when you have a bunch of smart people, like let's say you recruit all the Indians to come over to San Francisco to work in tech or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like all the smart guys are going somewhere. So I guess essentially what they're saying is that they were able to get most of the EOS block producers are in China. So it's becoming like kind of like just like a game, with other whales.
Interesting. Real quick, Adam, before you continue, one of the things in this quote, right? He said that the EOS tribe has never participated in the game of vote trading, right? This was one of our big critiques from the very beginning about EOS, right? That they created their structure in this hierarchical kind of, these are the people that vote and they have all this power and stuff. And it's like, it's not that hard to predict that what that's going to do is create political games and concentration of power that's going to be destructive to the system because it'll serve the interest of he who holds that power. So it's one of these kind of red flag things that we saw at the very beginning. And hearing this guy mention it, why is he even mentioning vote trading right now? Well, because they're in a system that clearly relies on those votes and manipulation, and you know who it is. A true blockchain voting system needs to have more anonymity and decentralization than that.
Yeah, and what's the Next part I actually referenced, like in the notes, I know you guys before my time did EOS 101, and you expressed issues on the governance and it being pretty centralized. So for those who don't know, there are 21 block producers at any time, and they make governance decisions, establish consensus on the chain, and earn substantial rewards. So what Luskin was saying was that the most technically proficient block producers are receiving little to reward at all now, making it very unprofitable for them to, continue being a block producer. And that is not good for the growth of EOS. If you're now putting people that are just big bag holders or something ahead of the ones that truly are working for, like building the projects on EOS or just working within EOS. Also, this was one thing that I didn't know, and it's kind of shocking that they did this. On May 8th, 2019, they burned $167 million worth of EOS for the worker proposal system, which was a way to fund EOS dApp development. I didn't really explain why they did it, but it seems crazy that it was in an EOS savings account, and they just got rid of it altogether. It doesn't make any sense why they would do this. You would want people like trying to build dApps on EOS and getting rewarded for it. I don't really understand. That's just kind of an odd, decision. Recently, EOS New York proposed an EOS user agreement, which was adopted by 15 of the 21 BPs. But nothing against vote buying was in the agreement. So they just neglected this is exactly the thing that you and Luskin have been talking about. And they just decided, we're going to omit that. So, yeah, these are things that are like, this could be an issue. These are telltale signs of an issue. But, you're not saying like, oh, EOS is a sinking ship or anything, because it's still early on in the project. And apparently block 1 could get, which is like, I forget what block, I'm always like, do you know what block 1's ties are with EOS? Do you remember?
No, not exactly. Not exactly. And I'll be honest, I'll come clear that the red flags or the kind of weaknesses that I feel that I spotted in the EOS system made me lose interest in them so early on that I haven't kept up with their development and their partnerships and their general direction, simply because I don't have faith in the product because of the fundamental structure, right? And look, I'm going to go on a little tangent here. Whatever. We have the extra time, so might as well. But this is one of the reasons why I come off as just shilling Cardano all the time or being so pro Cardano. But I just want to show a fundamental difference. When Cardano was trying to figure out how to, which they still are, so I'll give you that. It's not like they're finished. But as Cardano is trying to figure out how to decide how are votes going to be distributed, who's going to hold the power, right? They're creating systems where you can easily delegate your stake to whoever you want, and you're moving it quickly. It never gets attached anywhere. Fees have to be transparent. The stakeholders never hold the actual funds. IOHK itself has to bid for the development to keep developing on the project in the future. So there's like all these steps, and they study game theory. They brought in people who study game theory to try to figure out all the little things that they could miss, because it's not just about design. It's about unintended consequences. So you could do something with the best intention, but because you didn't have the time or you didn't put in the effort to break down the possible outcomes, you don't see the ways in which a node holder could cheat or manipulate or, like you said, vote buying, right? So to me, the fact that IOHK recognizes this as a problem from the beginning and is investing resources in trying to solve the problem, whereas like EOS, in my opinion, is putting forward a tried and true political system, right? Like, hey, what if we give, X amount of people a bunch of power, and then you can elect them, and then they'll represent you. Look at every fucking democracy in the world right now. Like, what are you talking about? You're not bringing anything new, right?
It just doesn't work.
It's just not, exactly. And especially when it's directly tied with the incentive of money. It's so financially tied. literally like vote buying here goes hand in hand with the economics of the system. It's more directly linked than voting in a democracy to the dollar, because here the unit is merged, right? So how could you not see, I say this to EOS, right? Like whatever development they do, I'm not saying that they can't create projects. I'm not saying that they won't succeed as a project. I'm not saying that EOS is not going to be worth more money in the future. I'm just saying that I can't imagine a future where EOS isn't continuously plagued by this type of corruption, dysfunction, and manipulations of power, because it wasn't designed to distribute that power.
I think sometimes we need to zoom out and look at these coins and blockchains, cryptocurrencies, whatever you want to call it, platforms, as companies. That's and right. If you run a company and you do not think that they're making good decisions from a business standpoint, then that's probably not a good decision to, like that's just like you shouldn't be having too much faith in them as a coin. Mm-hmm. And if there are things that just keep happening, red flags, whatever, you don't like the team, whatever it is, like it's still a business. This is still something that needs to be run well. And I think we kind of forget that sometimes, that it's like, oh no, like, the coin is, because it's like kind of like separated a little bit. You just, but these are just all businesses that just happen to be using a coin to kind of, utilize the business.
But let me push you a little bit here just to play devil's advocate, Adam. I would argue that EOS certainly is, in this case, a business. It's essentially a big, giant financial network or institution that is controlled by a couple of decision heads that we can call the executives or the main. Everybody's a shareholder, but these guys are the board members, right? So in a very real way, EOS is a traditional business on blockchain. But when you look at something like Ethereum, Bitcoin, or what Cardano is aspiring to develop, you're talking about a much more complicated, decentralized network, which, yes, is trying to have cohesive goals, but many of the challenges that they encounter is because they are trying to be truly decentralized. So they are creating something new. So, yes, to me, EOS is more of a business on blockchain, whereas Bitcoin is a truly decentralized. Of course, we know about there's mining centralization and all these things, but it's a better game theory that kept it more decentralized. So it's not a traditional political system. It's a network. And I guess for me to envision something truly taking over the world, it's going to have more of the feelings of a network like Ethereum than just a business like EOS here. Where how are they going to take this global? You're going to go to Zimbabwe and Cuba and Russia and Iran and try to get all their citizens to adopt more and more of EOS, going through the same fucking 21 people? No, it's not going to happen.
So Block One is actually the company that launched the code behind EOS. And by the way, remember, it was a $4.1 billion ICO. And it's a lot of money that I feel like probably did not get put to good use. They're the largest token holder, and they could apparently what the thing is that they could have easily redefined the governance on the chain, but they are yet to take action. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, nothing is, they're yet to take action. They could do it, but if they don't do it, there's going to be a lot of issues. But if they do it, I mean, it's just like, yeah, go ahead.
Here's my final prediction, and this is why I consider it a no return point. I don't believe, this is an article of faith maybe, I don't believe that EOS will be capable of making that change. And here's why. Because the people that will have to make that change will essentially be 21 people with a lot of power deciding to have less power. And it'll be extremely difficult. That's why the United States Congress doesn't vote to give themselves salary cuts. They don't vote to make their work weeks longer. They've only worked shorter and shorter hours for more and more money, because the people voting are voting on their own best interest, not the interest of the network. And I don't care what anybody says, they're not truly aligned because they hold a totally different position from everybody else in the network. So I don't believe that EOS will be capable of making the change in any kind of relevant foreseeable future that will allow them to compete with truly public blockchains. That's what
interesting. I think that's like pretty on point. EOS is definitely not one of my favorite coins. And yeah, there's just like kind of things that happen, they keep happening. One more thing that I think is another good point. There are 2 forks that have happened already within EOS. One is something called Worbii, Worbii, and it's created with certain consumer protections and more of a focus on the financial industry. Then there's another one called Telos, which is actually feel like they're doing what EOS did wrong. Telos has a token cap of 40K max, so you can only have 40K Telos. So like you can't really be a whale. And then a number of innovations to ensure potential BPs actually serve. So they're trying to just correct kind of what EOS is doing wrong. And to be honest, I'm interested in Telos. Like they got away from EOS. I don't know. Like it seems like an interesting fork. Smart for them to move away, and maybe those people were actually really that's the thing with forks. When people leave, that's a good amount of technical like knowledge that is moving away usually. Yeah, there's people that are just like, oh, I'm a Telos fanboy or whatever, and I'm going to go with them. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people that were on EOS that were actually like legitimately good decided to move to Telos as well. I don't know.
You know what? This is going to be unpopular, but I'm glad talented people are leaving EOS because I want as many talented people working on true dApps as possible. So maybe. I
mean, you guys have called it. We need to have a track record, but you called Substratum, Cryptopia, a few others.
I'll admit, Brent and I have had this conversation where we recognize that we have very small knowledge. Our programming knowledge is lacking. Our true understanding of all the technological intricacies are lacking, and we don't have a financial expertise. But we do apply a rigorous process of just common sense, basic kind of structural human nature kind of game theory. Like, where is this going? And when you see a ton of red flags, you got to let it go. Bye-bye. This is where the Warren Buffett quote comes in. You can pass up on you don't have to swing at every ball. It's not a baseball game. You don't get thrown up to the plate and say, here are the next 3 balls, 3 strikes, and you're out. You literally get to pass on 99% of things that exist and wait for good opportunities. So when a Bitcoin exists, or when an Ethereum exists, or when a Cardano exists, to me, investing in EOS is just forget about it. I wouldn't even consider it.
Definitely true. All right, so we're going to move on to crypto around the world. Yeah, I shouldn't sing ever, but yeah, we do love Daft Punk.
You definitely do. I do as well. And now let's talk about a cryptocurrency that we can all truly believe in. EOS is one thing, but I'm really excited about this upcoming project. North Korea is building their own Bitcoin, Adam. North Korea, ever heard of them? They're in Asia.
Who?
North Korea. They're in China.
Dennis Rodman's favorite.
That is right. Yeah. Yep. Dennis Rodman's holiday spot. All right, so here's the story. We've always talked about this. This is kind of the same token about these countries that are forced to dive into blockchain in order to circumvent U.S. sanctions. So in the case of North Korea, we are now getting the story that they are starting to develop their own cryptocurrency to avoid sanctions. The quote specifically was, "We're still in the very early stages of the creation of a token, but we are in the phase of studying the goods that will give value to it." So right off the bat, that's interesting because it means that they're looking at something like the petro, where a commodity that they possess would be able to back the cryptocurrency. Maybe they understand that the currency itself is not just going to have value just based on the economy. They're specifically not saying that they're trying to put their national currency on the blockchain. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that they're looking into developing a cryptocurrency that they can use to navigate international economy without having to deal with U.S. sanctions. So, yeah, this is really interesting, and North Korea has been taking advantage of this in different ways. There was one specific example that I want to mention so that we can get an idea of what it is they're thinking about or how they're trying to do this, right? So, again, the U.S. says, okay, all these businesses, you cannot do business with North Korea, right? So in 2018, last year, a guy named Jonathan Foong Ka Kung, which is a Singapore-based boat captain, he started a company that takes a boat and sells shares of it. So, right, instead of just saying, okay, so this is my boat, you can have this digital token, which gives you a share of the boat, and that way you can share in the revenues of the boat. All right, tokenizing boats doesn't sound that interesting, except for this. If North Korea owned that boat and it was whatever, trading, carrying natural resources, whatever, then the fact that it's a North Korean vessel immediately means that all these countries and all these ports and all these banks would have to say, I can't do business with you. Otherwise, the United States might sanction me, might fine me for doing business with a North Korean entity. But now that this boat is owned by a Singapore captain, it becomes almost impossible to realize that, oh, actually, 85% of the tokenization of this boat is in North Korea, right? So it's technically a North Korean ship, essentially in stocks, but you're able to obfuscate who owns it. It's the same thing that we do in America with corporate structures. When people don't want to know who owns the actual company, you just set up all these other offshore companies and holding companies and things. So you hide yourself between the different layers of ownership. So that's really what North Korea is talking about doing here, right? Creating cryptocurrencies and utilizing blockchain in such a way that it allows them to engage in business activity without having to use the dollar or SWIFT or traditional banks.
Wow, that's quite clever, to be honest.
It is, and it transitions us to the next story. These are really two in one. But another part of the world, similar situation, is now we're going to Cuba, which we have also talked about how they are ramping up their blockchain utilization. But this story was cool. It was in Vice, and it talked about how since the rollout of mobile internet in Cuba about a year ago, more people are having access to crypto, and it's actually stimulating economic activity in interesting ways. They talk about a specific guy, Jason Sanchez, is a cell phone shop owner in Cuba. So one of the problems that they have is they try to repair cell phones, but if a part breaks and they don't have it, they can't access it because he can't go online and buy a cell phone part because he lives in Cuba. He just can't go on Amazon and say, let me buy this screen, let me buy this SIM card, let me buy this antenna, because as soon as they recognize him that he's logged in from Cuba, just like what happened to Brent with Coinbase, as we already know, just logging in Cuba immediately shuts you out. And just to show you how bad this is, how pervasive it is, it actually turns out last year for Hurricane, let me see, which one was it? There was a big tornado in Havana recently, and there's all these crowdfunding.
Irma?
It might have been Irma. But basically, all these crowdsourcing sites that pop up, you know how, oh, let's help Puerto Rico, and a bunch of people put money together and a Kickstarter or whatever, something like that to go help. They got shut down. Some of the ones that were trying to help Cuba simply because it mentioned Cuba, right?
Yeah, that Bitcoin is kind of either they need to. Why are the sanctions so? Like, are these are not sanctions anymore, right? This is just Cuba.
No, these are political. No, these are political sanctions. This is the United States, which we can really to understand that we have to conceive of the United States as the source of power of the global monetary system today, and they can basically say, all right, here are the sanctions on Cuba. Not only are we as United States not going to trade with Cuba, but we're saying anybody that transacts with Cuba is considered part of the sanctions. So then businesses like Coinbase or like a bank or like, let's say PayPal, who will just handle transaction payments, none of them can touch it because then they can get a huge fine from the United States government, or they could get locked out of the dollar, which would be disastrous, right? It's business suicide. That's the power of sanctions. So when you hear about Iran or Russia or Cuba or North Korea suffering from U.S. sanctions, it's really talking about the United States finding ways to cut them off from the economic activity of the world, and why you hear so much about these countries kind of like trying to find alternative sources, right? Like China with Iran, with Russia, with Cuba. Well, what do these countries have in common? It's certainly not culture and religion. It's being blocked out by U.S. sanctions.
That's true. It's definitely a good tie-in. For crypto around the world.
All right, Adam. So that tells us a little bit about what's going on in the world. So, if you want to increase your Bitcoin activity, just move to North Korea or Cuba. But tell me about the latest scam. No, that's a scam.
So this is actually an old scam, but it's just the SEC is going after all the ICOs from the 2017 ICO craze. This one is called ICO Box, and its founder is Nikolai Evdokimov. And what's funny is I actually thought that this guy was like the same guy from the Paragon coin who also had to deal with an SEO case. Turns out Paragon actually settled recently, but they were using ICO Box platform for investors, I guess. So maybe there's a Russian connection. So what they did was it was $14 million in illegal securities. They sold it to more than 2,000 individuals, and they exposed investors to investments which are now basically worthless without providing investors pertinent info to make informed decisions. And if you do that and you just say, hey, invest here, and it ends up being your friend's company, Paragon Coin, and then Paragon Coin has the biggest ICO at the time or whatever, and then completely tanks a few months later, it's not going to look well for you. It's not going to look good. So I guess ICO Box was like, hey, come here and I'll get you like into these different ICOs and stuff. And all those ICOs ended up being pretty worthless. And one thing of note is the website ICO rating, which I think I might have gone to maybe back in the day. It's a cryptocurrency rating site, was fined $269K last year for failure to disclose payments received from issuers of digital assets. Basically, they got in trouble for shilling, but not letting people know that these were shilled projects. Mm-hmm. So their SEC's going after, like they're backtracking. They're looking at all these companies, all these people during that time period that were shilling or just making bad investments, that were not registered, and they're getting those people.
Yep. And this is so revelatory, man. I mean, ICO rating. I remember I found them at one point and, just browsed through the website or whatever. But really think about what that's saying. They're getting fined because ICOs were giving them money to get good ratings. Let's just be real. When they're getting money and they didn't, quote unquote, disclose the payment, it just means that somebody paid them a bunch of money to give them a good review, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds kind of insane and terrible and all, the fake advertisement and all that stuff. And it is. But just to remind people, one of the reasons we had a big issue in 2008 is because the credit rating agencies, the ones that are supposed to look at investments and say, hey, this is truly AAA, this is super safe, or this is not safe, were giving junk mortgage, subprime mortgage packages, AAA ratings, and selling them to the pensions of teachers and firemen and municipal workers and all this kind of stuff, and giving them AAA ratings. And then these people would believe in them because they didn't want the major financial institutions to no longer go to them for ratings. So this exact thing that we're seeing, this microcosm of the cryptocurrency space with ICOs giving them money, happened at the largest scale, financial scale possible in our entire economic system, which is why you as an individual need to navigate the waters of this world with a super skeptical mind, because even at the higher levels, human instinct and human intentions and human, really incentives are ruling it, right? This is basic game theory at work. Everybody's following their own incentives.
Yeah. I mean, I think those are very good points. And this is kind of why the Crypto Basic podcast was started to begin with, was to avoid things like this, and we're here to help. And,
the name should have been our best. Our actual name should have been the Scam Alert Podcast, but we felt Crypto Basic was a little more catchy.
Yeah, I like it. I guess that kind of wraps up That's a Scam. Doesn't seem, I guess Shots Fired was kind of covered with EOS.
I think that does kind of wrap up our content for this week. We hope Brent gets better. And of course, an important reminder to the audience, Adam, is that we're not financial advisors. So everything you heard here was our own opinion. And remember that all investments have inherent risks.
Yes, it's very true. But also remember to subscribe to our Patreon or check out our YouTube or hit us up on iTunes. Leave a good rating. Just say that I'm the best out of all. No, don't do that. These guys are great. Karim, so much information. Brent, hilarious. But yeah,
Sniffly.
Yeah, he's sniffly. But yeah, we are not financial advisors. And guess that's it for this week.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
See ya.